Hi. Oh, oh, oh. Put this in. Hi. Oh. Hi, Raquel.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey. Oh, guess we to get
Alright.
more people.
Mhm. I love your background. I wish I had something more than a plain white wall, but it's good to
Thank
work.
you. Okay, so I guess we can start. So, welcome everyone. I'm Zakearah, and I'm a mental health advocate with the Mental Health Awareness Project, MHAP. The Mental Health Awareness Project is a youth-led program through which young people in New York City are trained and engaged as mental health peer advocates in our communities. MAP's goal is to both empower youth and break the stigma tied to mental health by creating safe spaces led by young people to talk about mental health and other topics that affect our mental health. Today, I'll be interviewing Raquel Rose, MAP's Physiological Consultant, in honor of celebrating women in the mental health field. Raquel, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here today, and I hope that everyone had a great weekend. So my name is Raquel Rose. I currently am a counseling psychology doctoral candidate at New York University. And I predominantly work with Black and Brown youth who are impacted by multiple systems, whether it's education, legal, mental and physical health systems such as hospitals. And I predominantly also my clinical work. I'm currently a psychology extern at Bellevue Inpatient Hospital, and I hope after this to be a licensed counseling psychologist.
So, I would like to first thank you for taking time out of your day for doing this interview.
Happy to.
So, our first question is, how did you get into the mental health field and what sparked your interest in the field?
So just a little background on me is that I am actually from Jamaica in the Caribbean, and the ideas around mental health there's some similarities to America and some differences. I remember as a child, we would always talk about like, oh, that person has duppies in them, or mental health difficulties were just boiled down to, oh, that person's lazy. And as a child, I didn't really understand why they were just like people were so afraid of those who were having mental health difficulties, as well as I didn't understand like why I was told not to cry when I was feeling upset. So I think it was just some of the stigma and the cultural norms around mental health that kind of like followed me throughout my childhood, and has kind of like basically sparked my interest in the mental health field. And then that went from after I immigrated to America. Not only did I continue to see some of that stigma in the Afro-Caribbean community here in the United States, but also Black Americans. I also saw that a lot of individuals are suffering from intergenerational trauma. There was excessive policing of Black and Brown bodies. There was a lot of poverty, and I saw how those two things collided, both the stigma and structural oppression, to decrease mental wellness. So that has kind of inspired me to continue into this field today.
Okay. Our second question. At what age did you learn about mental health, and what were your beliefs on it before you became a professional?
Um, so as I said before, I was like, when I was younger, I kind of noticed that there were like some people with mental difficulties, and my parents explained it to me when I was small. It was like, oh, that person, and this is going to sound a little derogatory, but oh, that person's sick in the head. So that's how they would say it. And I was like, okay, this person is dealing with something really difficult. But when I actually learned about what mental health was in the field was when I was in junior high and high school, and I started to kind of was able to be exposed more to the research field. I have a lot of great mentors and teachers who are like, it seems like you're interested in psychology and mental health, and they were the ones that helped me get a more concrete idea of like the questions I had. So it was actually through research first that I learned a bit more about mental health as a profession, and then I learned a little bit more about the practice, the actual therapeutic aspects of it.
That's interesting. So, a third question is, what do you think is different about how young people view mental health today from how you viewed it when you were young?
Mhm. I think one of the great things about young people today, and it's beautiful to me every time I see it, is just that there's just so much more acceptance around mental health difficulties, a lot more understanding, I feel, and maybe a little bit less fear around either being diagnosed with a mental health concern or having a friend who has a mental health concern. I do feel that when I was younger, I for me specifically, I just didn't understand what was happening. So I was like, I cry a lot and I have a lot of difficulties, but I was like, why don't people help? Why don't I get supported? For some of my friends, there was that fear around the mental health system about being considered, and big air quotes here, being considered crazy or lazy or weak. There's a lot of negative connotations, I think, and I think that has shifted a little bit more. There is still stigma. I think there's still concerns around, for example, like talking to a guidance counselor and maybe your guidance counselor calls ACS or something like that. But I do feel overall there is a much more positive view on mental health and supporting others who are having a hard time.
So, like to piggyback off of that question, how has your mental health impacted your journey as a mental health professional?
Mhm. So as I said before, I was a little bit of a crybaby as a child. Everything made me sad, everything made me cry. And I was a very sensitive kid. So I do feel that being such an empathic kid when I was younger and learning how to work around those feelings, whether it is sitting with those feelings when it was important to sit with them and not push them in the corner, or learning how to cope with them when I needed to. So, for example, in the middle of an exam, if I'm feeling frustrated, how do I cope in the moment? I think that has kind of helped me to be more empathic towards young people, especially who I love working with, on how they can like there are times when it's not the best time to like cope with your feelings. Sometimes you need to sit with it and process it. And I do feel like a lot of young people are often told, like, why don't you just get over it? You don't have a lot to worry about. I'm like, that's not true. Like, feelings are valid and they're important, and we all have our own worries. And I think being a child who has gone through receiving that has helped me to work with other young people. And also the things that I use to cope, a lot of young people also use. So I often use art, anime, cartoons, animation as one of my distraction techniques. And I think that has been a common source of comfort, I find, for young people, especially. So, yeah.
So, well, we would all like to know, how can we provide proper responses to our peers who ask us for help or to come tell us their problems?
So, and I think this can be a really difficult thing. A lot of the MAP advocates are getting a lot of great training around it. And Even for those who are trained in the mental health or peer advocate fields, it can sometimes feel kind of scary depending on what topic comes up with our peers. Um, I think that it's pretty common as someone who cares for other people, if your friend is having a hard time, to kind of just sit with them and support them. So I think a lot of people already do that. Um, but if there are times when you feel ill-equipped to deal with something that your friend is going through or a peer, you can just say that. You can say, like, I don't know what you're going through right now, but let me know how I can best support you. Or just say, like, hey, do you just need someone to sit with you while you're having a hard time? Or how can I help you? Whether it's getting a water or a snack for them. So sometimes it can just be another human being that sits with them through their problem can be the most helpful. I think if there's ever a situation where you feel very uncomfortable, whether whatever that person, that friend is going through is triggering you a lot because you've also gone through it, if you feel like it's not a safe situation or you feel triggered, you can also protect yourself in that moment and say, I don't know how to deal with this, but I can help you look for someone or an organization or a resource that can let you know better than I do because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. So you can just let them know like you're looking out for them, and part of that can be seeking a professional or an adult who maybe is more familiar with what your friend is going through.
Uh, how has your interactions with your patients changed your view on mental health or impacted the way you view a certain topic?
That's a good one. So I think sometimes it can be, I think one thing that has happened is how therapy is very individual focused, and especially working with young people and kids who may have difficult home lives. I've become more frustrated at how all the responsibility is placed on young people and that there isn't equal responsibility placed on their home context. We're a product of our environment. So in the inpatient unit where I am, if a young person is, I mean, is suicidal or engages in self-harm, a lot of times all the effort is focused on how can we help you cope and not continue doing that and have more positive coping skills. But I think not enough is focused on the family context and dynamic that kind of causes some of these problems in the first place. And I think that's one thing that I've been more and more frustrated with, and part of why I kind of do both individual therapy and why I do more policy and community work is to kind of say like, okay, family, you've experienced a lot of intergenerational trauma. How can we support you so you can support your kids in an effective way versus just holding kids accountable, which I think is one of the things that current therapy models does a little bit too much, if it's too much on the kids and not enough on the context.
So, does it ever become overwhelming? And if it does, how do we deal with it?
Yes, it does. And if anyone's watching this has ever felt like this is a lot and I feel stretched thin, I think especially over the pandemic, kind of sometimes having to put aside my own needs to support others, I think that came up a lot. There's some points where I recognize that I'm in the middle of a therapy session and my brain is like far away. It's not even that I'm thinking about anything else, it's just I'm just not fully there. And when that happens, I have to kind of, after the session, I have to kind of like come back to myself and be like, Raquel, what's kind of going on? Are you feeling burnt out? Are you feeling stressed out? Have you eaten? Have you slept properly? Are you eating junk? Like, what's going on? In a compassionate way. So the first way that I deal with it is just to notice it. It's just to be compassionate and say like, okay, you've been working extra hours or you've had really hard cases, just noticing that it's a thing that's happening either in your brain or in your body or just in your spirit. Does your spirit feel uneasy and uncomfortable? And then I try to see if I can either talk to a supervisor to see like, can I have more time to practice my own self-care? Can I have more time to, or maybe like collaborate so that these cases aren't so difficult, to basically figure out like, how can I make adjustments in my context to be a little bit easier? And then the last thing I kind of do is trying to see how I can like make some barriers or contingency plans so I don't get as burnout as much. It doesn't always work, but I do think that preparing can be helpful. So it's self-care, reaching out for support, and then trying to see how I can build plans for the future. Whether that's meal prepping or not taking as many cases or trying to schedule a vacation far out in advance so I know, okay, by the time I get to this point, I'll have some like me time. So that I found has been the most helpful.
So we would like to know, how can we as a society help better young people's mental health?
Mm. Um, to kind of go back a little bit to one of the things I said before was that I don't think that there's enough understanding of just how difficult it is to be a young person today. I've seen a couple of memes where it's like went through a global pandemic and then now World War III, and I'm like, this wasn't a thing when I was a young person. Like there were a lot of social justice movements and things to be worried about, but nothing quite to this scale. Um, and I do think there needs to be more understanding of the fact that a lot of things are more difficult. Like college admissions are more selective. There's more work in schools. The pandemic, being far more politically active, I think, on average than in when I was growing up as a young person. And I do feel like there should be more things in place to help young people feel empowered in their decisions and to not follow such traditional models of what is important, what is successful, um, allowing young people to take mental health days without being penalized for it. I just feel like there should be just more general understanding of that the context is different. So what we currently do is not built for that context. It's built for older generations who may have had very different lives and very different needs.
Okay. If you had a chance to go back in time, what would you say to your younger self?
Ooh, eat less chocolate, I guess. No, what would I say to my younger self? I feel like this one's always a tough one. I think what I would say to my younger self is that um, to continue with all the creative things that you want to do. And I say this even though it's not related to fully related to mental health because one of the things that was very important to me was my identity as someone, as an academic, as a scholar. Like grades were everything for me, and I do feel like that was not. I wish I had like embraced other parts of my identity, such as like being an artist and being a writer. And those things were great mental health coping resources just to engage in those activities that I don't feel like I gave as much time to, whereas I just like very much focused on school and like getting a B or something like that was the end of the world. Um, but at the end of the day, as someone who has gone through undergraduate and been through and is going through graduate school right now, and like I consider myself relatively successful, I wish I kind of told her like enjoy yourself while you're young, to really focus on those self-care activities, to really pursue things that you felt that you weren't equipped to do, because there's always going to be a need for it. I wish I had started something like MHAP when I was younger. I didn't see it in my community and I wanted to see it born, but I didn't feel like I could start something like that. And then when I found Youth Advocates Corps, I was like, I have to be a part of this because this is what I wish I had done when I was younger. So continue to, I wish I could tell her to actually follow what you want to do because there is probably a need for it if you're envisioning it.
So one of our last questions is, what advice would you give to young people who are struggling with their mental health?
Mm. I would say it can be difficult, and I would say reach out. Um, a good mental health professional, and sometimes it can be really hard to find one. A good mental health professional is not going to judge you, is not going to put you on a path that is not best for you. They're going to walk alongside you as you're trying to figure out what is most important to you and what is most valuable to you in the moment. So if you're struggling, a good mental health professional will not just focus on where you're having trouble, they'll also focus on your strengths and use those to help you address what's most important for you in the moment. They can't wave a magic wand to fix everything, but they will be there for you and be present and show up, even on the days and weeks where you don't feel like showing up yourself. And that happens. Like, no one, like, don't strive for 100% attendance, even in therapy. But just reach out to anyone who can like be supportive of you and your decisions and your needs in that moment. Um, because ultimately that person is going to be like someone in your corner to help you as you're dealing with more difficult things. And it doesn't have to just be around therapy, it can be around dreams and hopes.
So we have a few questions from our MHAP advocates.
Mhm.
So one question is, what no, one question is, are there any trainings that you have completed for your career or education that has been the most useful or effective?
Mm. Okay. So for this one, I'm going to split it into two different sections. I'm going to split it into therapy section and research section. So one of the most helpful research section trainings I've been to was actually about building community research partnerships. Um, as MAP advocates kind of know that you need to get the input of communities if you're going to actually do effective workshops or interventions or research of any kind. Because if the community doesn't agree with what you're doing, then why are you doing that work? It's not going to be helpful to them. So I think doing a workshop on like how to build those effective community partnerships, like what's most important for the community, how to do that, how to distribute that data, how to collect information, how to make sure that it's the benefit is not just for the university, I think was one of the best workshops I've gone to for that. Um, for clinical work, I think one of the most important trainings that I've been to has been around what does it mean to do like risk assessments as well as mandated reporting. Um, So risk assessments is usually around things like self-harm, suicidality, and mandated reporting is when if there is harm to self or others, when do you basically like call ACS and the police? And the reason why I say this is one of the most important, why it's one of the most important trainings I've ever done is that I personally do not want to involve ACS or the police unless I really have to. And it can be a really scary thing to be a therapist in a room where you're not sure, like, do I bring in the police in this or not? Do I call ACS? Because a lot of times what happens is if you have to call ACS and you're working with a young person, the young person either can take on a lot of blame for that, like feel like they brought ACS into their family, it's disruptive, it's all my fault, or they can feel angry at the therapist, like, I trusted you and you broke my trust, you have disrupted my family. And I think one of the great things about having that training is like it kind of helps to let me know, like, okay, I don't have to worry about calling ACS or being a mandated reporter until like these things have happened. Because I do want to make therapy feel like a safe place for young people to share things. But I also recognize that as a mandated reporter, who has to also look out for the well-being of young people, it can be a fine line. So I was happy to kind of see like where the bar was on needing to do that.
So what personal skills and qualities are necessary to have a rewarding career in the mental health field?
Okay. Um, so I say this for everyone. If you really, really want to make money, this is not the field for you. I mean, you can, but it's really difficult. Um, However, if you do have drive, you can make your own private practice. Anyway, for skills and qualities, I do think that some of the qualities that make a really great therapist is being able to be empathetic even on some of your harder days, even if that level of empathy is much lower when you're having a difficult time. Being able to kind of find one little spark that helps you really relate to what your client is going through is really important. Or being able to find one of those little things that makes you like a client, even if you're having a difficult time with it. Every therapist has a client that they're not too excited about having. They're like, I kind of wish I didn't have them today. But being able to kind of figure out like, oh, I really like this person's sense of style, or I like this person's writing, or they're always on time, even if you have a hard time with them as a client, being able to pick that up, I think, is a really important skill. The other thing is to be consistent and to be very open to other perspectives. There are times when, as a therapist, you'll have someone say something that goes against your values or your morals, and if it's not hurting others, like actively a threat to others, then you can't just kick them out the door. So being able to engage in a values paradox of this is not important to me and this is not my value system, but it's important to them, is really important so that you can find a way to get to what is the larger work that needs to happen. So yes, I don't agree with this person's political ideas, but they're also hurting because they're suffering from depression or anxiety, something like that. So how do you do the larger work when you realize that you and this person across from you is very different? Um, and I think another important thing is boundaries. You have to be able to maintain some really strong boundaries between yourself and your client. If you're looking to do more social justice focused therapy work, that can be really hard. As I said, work predominantly with Black and Brown youth. And a lot of times I can feel like I do get very angry at systemic injustice that happens of young people not receiving services that they're supposed to, at being abandoned multiple times and let down by multiple adults. And there's some days when I have to kind of be like, okay, when is it I'm becoming too attached to here and I'm not being an effective therapist. So I think, yes, you have to be able to form those empathic bonds, but also like, where does it become a fine line between that and becoming even more involved than is helpful or healthy?
So, who are other women mental health professionals that inspire you and why?
Okay. So I have a very long list, but I will name a few, and I'm going to list them in different categories. So in the research field, my two main women that I'm like crazy about, one is Kimberly Crenshaw. Many people may have heard of her, but is a wonderful scholar who talks about intersectional feminism. And her work basically inspires a lot of my own research and clinical practice, where you cannot just take one part of a person's identity and separate it from others. She also does work that is individual focused and then larger systems. So um, you can't just look at a Black woman and say like, okay, all your issues are just because you're a person. It's you're a Black woman in America in this larger world under many systems. Like I have to see you within that entire context. Another research mentor is another woman in psychology that I think is really important is my own mentor, Dr. Shabnam Javdani. Um, she does a lot of work on community interventions for girls and women of color. She has been championing for a very long time to end violence against women and to end youth incarceration. So that has been really inspiring for me. Um, Clinically, I do have one mentor from last year who in particular, I found wonderful, though I have multiple mentors. Her name is Dr. Isabella, and she has been just wonderful. She's a Panamanian immigrant who believes in feminist and liberatory practices and has been really wonderful in considering the person and their past trauma and how that impacts how they are today. But she doesn't focus just on stories of trauma. She's also like, okay, let's consider trauma, but let's focus on your joy and your hope. And I think that's a very beautiful way to view human beings versus just as stories of trauma and loss and grief.
So, what is the day in the life of a grad student taking classes, therapy, and research?
Mhm. So thank goodness I no longer have to take classes. I am a fifth year right now, which means that all my classes that I have to take for exams are over. Um, Usually in your earlier years, so in your first year for a lot of programs, whether it's clinical or counseling psychology, you're going to be taking classes. and maybe doing a little bit of research, but it's very class heavy your first year. From your second to like, let's say your fourth year, you're going to be taking classes, most likely doing therapy and research. So you have all three. So that second year is really tough because you're getting used to juggling three things at one time, and it can be frustrating. It can be very tiring. That's when we encourage people like really up your self-care, really up those conversations with your supervisors to make sure you're not taking on too much. And then from your third year, maybe say like to your fourth or fifth year, um, the amount of classes you have to take decreases, and you kind of focus more on your research and your clinical work. So you kind of start to get more specialized. For me, I started out working with everyone. So young people, middle age, older people, doesn't matter what difficulties they came in. And now I predominantly work with adolescents and emerging adults. So I specialized as I got older. And then your very last year, which I'm not in right now, you do what's called an internship. So you basically work full time as a clinician at a various site. It can be a hospital or a school. You usually do not take classes during this time. You usually don't do as much research during this time. You really focus on practicing your clinical skills, and then you graduate after that. So it really depends on where you're at in your program. But in general, you usually have a little bit of everything every day. Sometimes you can portion it out so you can have one day just for clinical, one day just for research. But because it is such a busy life choice, you kind of have to learn how to juggle a little bit every day. But it depends. Some programs are more research focused, some are more clinical focused. So you can find a place that kind of can give you a little bit of everything.
Okay, so now we're gonna ask if the audience has any questions. So,
Also, I'm sorry, I'm terrible at technology, so let me know if there's a question that I'm not seeing.
okay.
Oh, well, thank you, Jenny.
So I guess. Oh, have you ever encountered hardship being POC or a woman in your field?
Right. So I do feel like that one statistic I'll say is that, and I don't know how much this has changed, but I think it's only like 5 to 7% of psychologists are Black. So that's a very small amount of licensed psychologists in the United States. And I do think that one thing that I've noticed is that I don't have many mentors who are women of color. I've been lucky to have one, but in general, there's not many. And I do feel like when something has happened in therapy that is very much related to my identity as a Black woman or an immigrant woman of color, um, it's hard to talk to someone who doesn't share those identities and to like really understand the frustration, and because you have to kind of like tell the entire story of what it means to be a person in this woman of color in this country. So I do think that has been one of the more frustrating things. The other thing has been assumptions about my capabilities and what is easy for me versus what is not. I've had a white faculty member once say that advocating for yourself is easy, and as a woman of color, I had to kind of say like, it's just because it was easy for you as a white male does not mean it's easy for me as a Black woman. So I do think that as a if you're an individual of color, a woman of color going into the field, um, it can be hard sometimes to speak up for yourselves. And when you do, you might find that there are people who don't understand how your identity is impacts how you move through a graduate program.
Jenny asks, do you think that therapy will be normalized with our new generations?
Hmm. I definitely feel like it's becoming more and more normalized, and I definitely find less pushback when it comes to inviting people for therapy. I think in general, there's always going to be that little bit of fear of systems. Like if I air my dirty laundry to a teacher or to a guidance counselor, like someone's going to call ACS. That is a very valid fear that I've seen a lot of young people come in with. So I don't necessarily think that's going to fully go away until we change systems to be more understanding of what families go through, especially families of color and those who experience a lot of poverty and intergenerational trauma. Um, but I do think like just the general stigma around like therapy and talking through problems and like the negative labels attached to that, like weakness or crazy, I do think that has gone down a lot, and I do hope that it hopefully disappears at some point.
So I guess that's all the questions. So
Mhm.
I want to thank you once again for taking the time out of your day to do this interview.
Mhm. No, happy to.
And
And I just want to say
have
thank
a
you
nice,
again to the Advocate Forts. So, mhm.
and have a nice evening, everyone. Take care.
Have a great one, everyone. Bye.